I took her to a cheap diner for our first date. What she did next shocked everyone. I sat across from the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, in the dingiest diner on the east side of town, watching her face as she took in the cracked vinyl seats, the flickering neon sign, and the faded menu with coffee stains on every page. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might break through my chest. This was it. The moment of truth. The moment that would tell me everything I needed to know about Celeste Hartley, the woman who had somehow agreed to go out with me, Marcus Webb, a guy who drove a 15-year-old sedan and wore the same 3 shirts in rotation because that was all I could afford. You see, I had brought her here on purpose, not because I was cheap, not because I wanted to humiliate her or myself, but because I needed to know who she really was beneath that radiant smile and those designer clothes. I needed to know if she could see me, the real me, or if she was just another person who would walk away the moment she realized I did not come from money, that I could not take her to 5-star restaurants or weekend getaways in Paris. I had been hurt before, wounded so deeply by someone who claimed to love me but left the second my financial situation became clear. I was not going to let that happen again. So I made a choice that night. A choice that would change everything. If this story resonates with you, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and looking beyond the surface, please hit that like button right now and subscribe to Kindness Corner. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message today, and I would love to know, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Your support means the world to me as I share this deeply personal chapter of my life. Let me take you back to where it all began. 6 months before that fateful dinner, I was working 2 jobs just to keep my head above water. During the day, I was a junior accountant at a small firm downtown, crunching numbers for barely enough to cover my rent. At night, I stocked shelves at a grocery store, coming home at midnight with aching muscles and an exhausted mind. My father had passed away 3 years earlier, leaving behind a mountain of medical debt that I had taken upon myself to pay off. It was my responsibility, my burden, my choice. He had given me everything growing up, working himself to the bone to put me through college, and I was not going to let his memory be tarnished by unpaid bills and collection notices. But life has a strange way of surprising you when you least expect it. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, I was leaving the accounting firm when I literally collided with someone coming through the revolving door. Papers flew everywhere, her briefcase popped open, and we both ended up on our knees gathering scattered documents as rain poured down outside. When I looked up to apologize, I found myself staring into the most captivating hazel eyes I had ever seen. She laughed. Actually laughed as we scrambled to collect everything, and in that moment of chaos and clumsiness, something sparked between us. Her name was Celeste, and she was meeting with one of the senior partners at my firm about an investment opportunity. She worked in finance, handled portfolios for wealthy clients, drove a sleek silver car that probably cost more than I would make in 5 years. Everything about her screamed success, sophistication, elegance. And yet, as we stood there dripping wet in that lobby, she did not look at me with annoyance or dismissal. She smiled, thanked me for helping gather her papers, and then did something unexpected. She asked if I wanted to grab coffee sometime. I almost said no. Every logical part of my brain told me this was a terrible idea, that we came from different worlds, that it would only end in heartbreak. But there was something in her eyes, something genuine and warm, that made me take a chance. I said yes, and we exchanged numbers right there in that lobby while my shirt dripped puddles onto the marble floor. Our coffee date turned into a 2-hour conversation where I learned she had grown up in Connecticut, attended an Ivy League school, and loved classical music and modern art. I told her about my background, about growing up in a working-class neighborhood, about my father and his sacrifice. I was honest about my current situation, about working 2 jobs, about the debt I was paying down. I watched her face carefully as I shared these details, looking for any sign of judgment or withdrawal. But she just listened, asked thoughtful questions, and seemed genuinely interested in my story. We started seeing each other regularly after that. Coffee dates turned into walks in the park, which turned into long phone calls that stretched late into the night. She would tell me about her high-pressure job, about difficult clients and market fluctuations, and I would share stories from my overnight shifts at the grocery store about the regular customers and the unexpected moments of human connection that made the exhaustion worthwhile. With each conversation, I found myself falling harder, but also growing more terrified, because I knew that eventually we would reach a point where the differences in our lifestyles would become impossible to ignore. That point came when she mentioned wanting to take our relationship to the next level, to go on a proper dinner date. My stomach dropped. I had been dreading this moment, knowing that my budget could not accommodate the kind of restaurants she was probably used to. I had maybe $40 to my name after paying bills, certainly not enough for the upscale establishments where she likely spent her Friday evenings. I could have been honest, could have explained my situation more bluntly, but something held me back. A part of me, the wounded part that still remembered my ex-girlfriend's cruel words about being a financial burden, decided to test Celeste instead. So I suggested dinner that Saturday, and when she asked where, I told her I wanted to surprise her. The look of excitement on her face made my chest tighten with guilt, but I pushed forward with my plan. I was going to take her to Morty's Diner, a rundown place on the edge of town where truckers stopped for cheap coffee and greasy burgers. The booths had duct tape holding the seats together, the floor was perpetually sticky, and the special of the day was whatever Morty felt like cooking. It was the kind of place where a full meal cost less than $10, where nobody dressed up, where the fluorescent lights flickered and buzzed like dying insects. I told myself I was doing this to protect my heart, to see if she valued me or my potential bank account. But deep down, I knew I was also punishing her preemptively, assuming she would react badly and thereby justifying my decision to guard my heart. It was not fair to her, and I knew it. But fear makes us do irrational things. Saturday arrived faster than I wanted. I picked her up in my old sedan, the one with the cracked dashboard and the radio that only worked on AM stations. She looked absolutely stunning in a simple but elegant dress, her hair falling in soft waves around her shoulders. My heart sank further. She had dressed up, put thought and effort into this evening, and I was about to take her to the most unglamorous place I could think of. As we drove across town, I could feel her curious glances, could sense her trying to figure out where we were headed. When I pulled into the cracked parking lot of Morty's Diner, with its buzzing neon sign that read Mo Ties, because the R and second T had burned out years ago, I finally looked at her face. This was the moment. This was where I would see who Celeste Hartley really was. I watched her take in the scene, the flickering sign, the peeling paint on the building's exterior, the old pickup trucks parked haphazardly around us, the group of construction workers in dirty boots heading inside for their dinner break. I waited for the disgust, the confusion, the polite excuse about not feeling well so we could leave. I waited for her to reveal that she was just like everyone else who had judged me for not having enough money, enough status, enough of whatever arbitrary measure people use to determine someone's worth. But Celeste did not do any of those things. Instead, she turned to me with that same warm smile I had first seen in the lobby of my office building and said she loved diners, that some of her best childhood memories involved places exactly like this one. The words hit me like a physical blow. I had been so prepared for rejection that acceptance felt almost foreign. We walked inside together, and I led her to a booth near the back. The vinyl seat cracked loudly as we sat down, and I cringed internally. Morty himself came over to take our order, his apron stained with decades of meals, his gruff voice asking what we wanted without any pleasantries. I expected Celeste to be put off by his abruptness, but she just smiled at him and asked what he recommended. Morty, who I had never seen crack a smile in the 3 years I had been coming here, actually grinned and told her the meatloaf was fresh today. As we waited for our food, sitting in that shabby diner with its peeling wallpaper and buzzing lights, something shifted inside me. Celeste was not pretending to be comfortable. She genuinely was comfortable. She talked about her grandfather, about how he used to take her to a place just like this every Sunday morning, How those moments sitting in a worn booth eating simple food were some of the happiest times of her childhood. She talked about how she sometimes felt suffocated by the expensive restaurants her colleagues preferred, by the pretension and the performance that came with dining at places where appearances mattered more than the actual food or company. Our meals arrived, served on chipped plates that had seen better days. The meatloaf was exactly what you would expect from a diner, hearty and unpretentious, served with lumpy mashed potatoes and overcooked green beans. But as I watched Celeste take her first bite, as I saw the genuine enjoyment on her face, I realized something profound. I had been testing her, yes, but I had also been testing myself. I had been so focused on protecting myself from potential hurt that I had almost sabotaged something real and beautiful. What happened next truly shocked me and everyone else in that diner. As we finished our meal, Morty came over with the check, placing it on the table between us. I reached for it immediately, but Celeste was faster. Before I could protest, she had already looked at the total, pulled out her wallet, and placed enough cash to cover the bill plus a generous tip on the table. But that was not the shocking part. The shocking part came when she stood up and walked over to Morty at the counter. I watched, confused, as she spoke with him quietly for a few moments. Morty's expression changed from his usual gruff demeanor to something softer, almost vulnerable. Then Celeste did something I will never forget as long as I live. She hugged him. She hugged this grumpy old diner owner who I had assumed was incapable of human warmth. And when they pulled apart, I could see tears in Morty's eyes. She came back to our table and explained what I had just witnessed. She told me that her grandfather had passed away 2 years ago, that he had owned a small diner just like this one in Connecticut, that places like Morty's reminded her of him and the simple wisdom he had shared over countless breakfast plates. She had told Morty about her grandfather, about how much these kinds of establishments meant to her, and apparently Morty had shared that he was struggling to keep his diner open, that corporate chains were driving away his customers, that he was not sure how much longer he could hold on. But what Celeste did next shocked everyone in that diner even more. She asked Morty if she could help. Not with charity or pity, but with her professional expertise. She offered to look at his finances, to help him create a sustainable business plan, to use her connections to bring in more customers. She did all of this right there on the spot in a cheap diner for a man she had just met, simply because she recognized someone in need and had the ability to help. The other patrons in the diner had been watching this interaction, and suddenly, one by one, they started coming over. The construction workers, the truck drivers, the single mother with 3 kids in the corner booth. They all wanted to share their own stories, to express their love for Morty's place, to offer their own forms of support. Within 20 minutes, that rundown diner had transformed into a community gathering, with people pledging to eat there more often, to spread the word, to help in whatever way they could. I sat there in that booth, watching the woman I had tried to test with this location, watching her bring together a group of strangers through pure kindness and genuine care, and I felt something break open inside my chest. Shame, first and foremost, for doubting her, but also something else. Hope. Real, radiant hope that maybe, just maybe, I had found someone who saw the world the way I wanted to see it. Someone who valued people over possessions, connection over status, kindness over everything else. When we finally left the diner that night, Morty walked us to the door, something I had never seen him do for any customer. He shook my hand, thanked Celeste again, and told us we were welcome back any time. As we stepped out into the cool night air, I stopped Celeste before we reached my car. I needed to confess. I needed to tell her the truth about why I had really brought her there. Standing under that flickering neon sign, I poured out everything. I told her about my ex-girlfriend who had left me when she realized I was not going to be wealthy anytime soon. I told her about my insecurities, my fears, my need to protect myself from being hurt again. I admitted that I had brought her to Morty's as a test, to see if she would judge me for not having the money to take her somewhere expensive. I laid bare my worst self, expecting her to be angry, to feel manipulated, to walk away right then and there. Celeste listened to my confession without interrupting. When I finally finished, she was quiet for a long moment, and I prepared myself for the anger I deserved. But instead, she took my hands in hers and told me something I will carry with me forever. She said that she understood my fear, that she had her own insecurities and walls built from past hurts. She said that what mattered was not the test I had created, but what I chose to do moving forward. She said that real love, the kind worth fighting for, required vulnerability and trust, and that she was willing to build that with me if I was willing to let her in. If this story has touched your heart, if it has reminded you that kindness and understanding still exist in this world, please take a moment to like this video and leave a comment. Share it with someone who might need this reminder today. Your engagement helps spread these messages of hope and humanity to more people who need to hear them. That night marked a turning point in my life. Celeste did help Morty save his diner, working with him over the following months to modernize his business practices while keeping the authentic character that made the place special. The diner not only survived but thrived, becoming a local landmark that people traveled from across the state to visit. Morty's story was featured in the local newspaper, and the community rallied around his establishment in a way that restored my faith in collective human goodness. But more importantly, Celeste taught me to trust again. She showed me through her actions, day after day, that she valued me for who I was, not what I could provide materially. She never made me feel less than because of my financial situation. Instead, she encouraged me in my work, celebrated my small victories, and stood beside me as I continued paying down my father's debts. She understood that integrity meant honoring my commitments, even when they came at a personal cost. Over the next year, our relationship deepened in ways I had never experienced before. We built something real and solid, based on mutual respect, honest communication, and shared values. She met my mother, who had worried constantly about my isolation after my father's death, and the two of them formed a bond that brought tears to my eyes. I met her family, expecting judgment from people accustomed to wealth and prestige, but instead finding warm and welcoming individuals who cared more about their daughter's happiness than her partner's bank account. Eventually, I finished paying off my father's medical debts. The day I made that final payment, I sat in my car and cried, feeling the weight of 3 years lift from my shoulders. Celeste was the first person I called, and she cried with me over the phone, sharing in my relief and pride. That evening, she took me out to dinner, not to some expensive restaurant, but to Morty's diner, where we had first discovered what really mattered to each other. 2 years after that first date, I proposed to Celeste in that same booth at Morty's. I had saved for months to buy her a modest ring, nothing compared to the diamonds she could have afforded herself, but chosen with care and love. When I got down on one knee in that dingy diner, Morty turned off the jukebox and every patron went silent. When she said yes, the entire place erupted in applause, and Morty served us free pie to celebrate, tears streaming down his weathered face. We got married 6 months later in a small ceremony that perfectly reflected who we were as a couple. Simple, meaningful, surrounded by people who truly mattered to us. Morty catered the reception, insisting that it was his gift to us, and his food was more appreciated than any fancy wedding meal could have been. Before I end this story, I want to ask you something special. In the comments below, please share what lesson this story taught you. What will you take away from Marcus and Celeste's journey? Your reflections might help someone else who reads them. Looking back now, I understand that the real test that night at Morty's diner was not whether Celeste would judge me for my lack of money. The real test was whether I could overcome my own fears and insecurities enough to accept genuine love when it was offered to me. Celeste shocked everyone that night, not just by embracing a cheap diner date, but by showing radical kindness to a stranger, by building community in an unexpected place, by choosing compassion over judgment at every turn. She taught me that true character reveals itself not in grand gestures or expensive settings, but in small moments of choice, in how we treat people when there is nothing to gain, in whether we see opportunities to help or reasons to judge. She taught me that the cost of a meal has nothing to do with the value of the experience, that wealth means nothing if you are poor in spirit, and that the richest life is one filled with authentic connection and purposeful kindness. Today, we have been married for 3 years. I still work at the accounting firm, though I have been promoted several times, and my financial situation has improved significantly. Celeste continues her work in finance, but has also started a nonprofit that helps struggling small businesses, inspired by her experience with Morty. We eat at Morty's Diner at least once a month, and every time we walk through that door, we remember the night that changed everything. My advice to anyone watching this is simple. Do not let fear prevent you from accepting love. Do not test people in ways that reflect your insecurities rather than their character. And most importantly, recognize that true worth has nothing to do with money or status and everything to do with how we choose to treat each other when nobody is watching, when there is nothing to gain, when kindness is simply the right thing to offer. Celeste could have been offended that night. She could have walked away from a man who brought her to a rundown diner instead of an upscale restaurant. But she chose to see beyond the test to the hurt that motivated it, chose to respond with grace instead of anger, chose to demonstrate through her actions what really matters in life. And in doing so, she did not just change my life, she changed Morty's life, brought together a community, and reminded everyone in that diner that evening that goodness still exists in this world if we are willing to practice it. That is the story of how I took her to a cheap diner for our first date, and what she did next shocked everyone. But more than that, it is the story of how I learned to trust again, how I discovered that real love does not demand perfection or wealth, and how one woman's kindness created ripples that touched more lives than I could have ever imagined. If you are someone struggling with trust, with fear, with the belief that you are not enough just as you are, I hope this story reminds you that there are people in this world who will see you, really see you, and choose you anyway. Not despite your struggles, but as a complete human being worthy of love and respect. Thank you for listening to my story, for being part of the Kindness Corner community, and for believing that these messages of hope and humanity still matter. Until next time, choose kindness, trust in second chances, and never underestimate the power of seeing people for who they truly are.